And Matt, I'm going to go ahead and turn the cybersecurity discussion over to you.
Lance, it's great to see you. So it's as we get into the real discussion, why don't you just give a quick introduction about yourself and kind of your role within healthcare?
Yeah, you bet. So again, my name's Lance Reid. I'm the CEO of Telcion Communications Group. Telcion was founded about 20 years ago. We're basically a security first managed IT services company with a focus on healthcare. And that basically just means that we provide IT services to healthcare organizations, and that sometimes that's project work, taking out specific projects that will accelerate an IT team's ability to get stuff done faster. Other times it means just supplementing different facets of IT within a company, up to and including fractional IT services or CIO services. So that's the basis of what we do. But within healthcare, man, I just really focused on trying to help the folks in the healthcare industry just get those layers of security in place that will protect them from the bad guys.
Well, that is certainly an important thing to keep an eye on, since the bad guys seem to be engaging in constant attacks. Given the certainly daily, I was going to try to figure out the more frequent cadence report of breaches. So from that perspective, then, is security different for the healthcare industry, or is it, kind of what is going on where, we just potentially hear about more issues within healthcare than, other industries, or is it just that
Yeah.
healthcare is announcing it more?
Healthcare does announce it a lot more. There are some legal requirements that they make those announcements, so we do hear a lot more about it. But it's everywhere. We run into it in our organization with clients or prospects or people reaching out to us that need help. I mean, weekly. It's just there are breaches happening all the time. Specifically though, within healthcare, there is it happens a lot. And the main thing that we're trying to focus on around there is just like creating layers of protection that are going to keep the bad guys out, and that are going to, you know, create a situation where you can be maximally protected from from a healthcare perspective.
So then, kind of as you're kind of building out those systems, what are some of the basic tenets that you follow as you're building out, those layers, and how do you get, the understanding and awareness of what protections are required?
Yeah. So first of all, and maybe to better answer your previous question too, is just that there are the similarities between private companies and healthcare organizations are very similar. A lot of tools are the same. The software is the same and so forth. One of the major issues or things that we just noticed though is that if you're a private company, there's not a whole lot of regulation around that, unless you're a financial institution or a publicly traded company, that kind of thing. You don't have a lot of other regulations that they're telling you or forcing you to use, security protocol or have security services in place to protect you. So at that point, the organization is just deciding themselves how much risk they want to take. And if they take too much risk, they may get breached and it could put them out of business. Whereas in healthcare, what's really happening there is that if healthcare folks don't take the measures necessary, they could find themselves, getting fined or being, legally brought to court, that kind of thing, to be held accountable. And so those are the major differences there. But from a pure, the tenets of security in healthcare, the way we look at it is you've got to have a multi-layered security approach. And so one of the first things I try and tell people is like, look, if you're coming to us to get some kind of 100%, guarantee, protection, that kind of thing, that's impossible. That can't happen. And if anyone tells you otherwise, you're being deceived. And so we can't give you 100%. So therefore, let's just work on how do we get multiple layers of security in place so that if one fails or one gets breached, there are other layers there that will grab or protect or keep that bad actor from getting any further. And so that's the main thing that we're going after. And we've identified around a dozen or so major security layers. If you have this dozen security layers in place, then you've got you can't get 100%, but you'll be as close to 100% as you can probably get, because we'll be able to catch the bulk, the majority, just such a high percentage. It will really protect the organization.
And as you're creating that multi-layered approach, say you're building it from in the first place or evaluating an existing one, how do you detect a weak link, or how do you, or what kind of processes do you advise having in place to see if a layer or a particular measure is weakening and requires, or either modification or change?
Yeah, so that is the epitome of all the security stuff, right? And where all the time consumption comes into play, because you can have all these tools, we can put all these layers in place, but if you're not monitoring those things, and you need to understand, it's like these tools that we put in place, they can throw off thousands of events per minute, things that they're seeing, observing, and some are just informational, pieces of just a piece of information for someone to know, and other things are critical, like, hey, there's actually a bad guy coming in, there's something happening, and we need to do something with it. And so the bottom line is you have to be monitoring all these events in order to be able to make adjustments and to verify. So I just go back to the old maxim of trust but verify. And so we're constantly in a situation of we've got to be going in and constantly looking at what layers we have in place and verifying that they're configured properly, that things haven't changed, and just doing that literally on a monthly, weekly, monthly kind of basis, because there's always potential for new openings.
Yeah, so kind of what are the mechanisms for implementing that monitoring process? Is it technology based, manual process, or kind of what I suspect is a combination of the two?
Yeah, there's several things. So most often we're going to lean on tools, and so you'll have different tools that are available that can look in or peek into. Most people have some kind of Microsoft back end that's going on. There are tools that will peek into the Microsoft background, back end, and can look at stuff and then give us a report and say, hey, here's weak spots that we can see. And then we can go through and we can work to remediate those things. But amazingly, a month later, and it'll find other things, because things are constantly changing. And all it takes is one click of the wrong person, and all of a sudden you open up a hole in things, right? So that's one option. Then another one is that you move into things that are what's referred to as a SOC or SIM kind of tool set. And so on the SOC SIM side of things, SOC being Security Operations Center. So if you're a large organization, you've got access. You may very well build out your own operations center, which is manned by multiple security engineers, and they run on a 24/7 basis, and they're going to monitor security events and those kind of things. And then the SIM tool is just it's a tool that the SOC uses, or that organizations can use, that takes in all the events. Because as I mentioned earlier, if you've got 1,000 events per minute, no human can keep up with that level of data coming in 24/7, right? So you need a tool. It will take all that information, it'll sift through the information, and then it will let you know, hey, here's the top things that are going on that need to be looked at. And sometimes it's just say, hey, a change happened, or you should just take a peek at something. And other times it's say, hey, there's something big going on and you need to dig into it. But it's alerting you to that. And so the operations center, the SOC, will use that tool to then dig into it, and usually elevate that back to the customer. Most customers need to outsource that. They can't afford to have those things on their stack, so they're not big enough. So they outsource it, and then it gets thrown back to them, though, to when it gets escalated to remediate whatever the issue is. So those are the typical ways we go about that.
Yeah, and that process certainly makes sense, and that's probably the way you actually operationalize the language I often throw into a contract, especially in a business associate agreement around security incidents, and you throw it. You have what I think is the now common language of there's constant pings and other things that are happening against the system, but we'll let you know if there's actually a problem. Otherwise, most of them are non-events, and you don't want the like couple 1,000-page log on a daily basis.
Yeah, and it's just impossible to go through that kind of thing and to make sense of it, or to catch and not let things slip through, right?
Yeah, and then kind of picking up on the point that you raised about a lot of organizations either don't have the staff, whether just physically available, or the other resources, time, monetary, to handle it in-house. How do you go about kind of determining how to appropriately divvy up those responsibilities? Because I suspect to some degree you can't wholly push it to the outside, but there has to be some degree of awareness and understanding internally to interface with those outside with that outside help.
Yeah, great question. So typically how that gets done is that a organization they'll say, hey, we need the security protection. We need someone monitoring, watching our security events and so forth. So they've realized they can't do that themselves. So they're willing to outsource that to a third party. And then with that third party arrangement, then the third party will have a team, a fairly large team of folks that then is monitoring things. And then you'll set up a what do you want to have happen when things come up? And so you'll walk through that with them when you're working out the arrangement. And it will usually be something along the lines of, hey, if it's informational or whatever, and we need to know about it, then let us know. If it's something that they can handle and just deal with, then please deal with it. Some organizations don't even want them to have that third party to have any access to their systems to make any modifications. So in that case, they're just gonna send the pertinent information over. But if it's so, and the key thing here is that, so if it's during the middle of the day or whenever it occurs, they'll email it over, and then the networking engineer folks that are on the customer side, they'll pick it up when they get in the morning, and they'll start looking through those things. But if in the middle of the night though, you've got a major breach that's occurring, you've got protocols in place where they're gonna email, they're going to pick up the phone and call somebody, they're going to have a whole list of people they're going to work through. It's like, hey, we've got something going on, it needs to be dealt with right now. What do you want to do? And then work through that. But usually it goes back to the customer to pick up the ball and run with that. And so that's just generally speaking, that's the way the process works out.
Yeah, and thinking about that broad process, what are kind of the preparatory steps that should be taken to be prepared for kind of that scenario that you're describing, where let's go worst case scenarios. You said like there's a big exfiltration or other breaches detected in the middle of the night. What policies or just what processes should be in place so you can hit the ground running and know what you're doing.
Yeah, so this is one of the things where it's like it's kind of back to that whole business continuity DR kind of plan. Because to me, this is no different than a massive power outage, weather situation, fires, floods, whatever they are. The same kind of impact happens to the organization. So you got to have a plan in place, and you need to practice that plan and know, hey, here's what we're gonna do. A lot of this though really starts boiling down to things like, when you talk about preparatory things, I just start going back to what is that worst case scenario? Let's say we have a breach, and the bad actor has made it all the way into our environment, and they are able to get hands on our patient data, which are the most critical thing we're trying to protect, right? And they've got and now they've encrypted it, and we no longer have access. And besides that, they've decided that, hey, we want to make this really hard. We're going to find out where you keep your backups at, and we're going to encrypt those too, and you can't even restore your data. So that's what they do in a worst case scenario. And so you have to prepare, and to be prepared for that, you have to have already looked at how are you getting your data and making that available in an offsite kind of way where it's quickly accessible but not accessible to those bad actors. So between that, having a checklist of stuff going on, so you know exactly what to do in the case of event, notifying the executive team, talking to your cyber insurance folks, getting your attorney involved, just kind of starting to running through that. Those are all things you want to prepare and have ready. What we find is most people, they aren't prepared, and what happens then is that they literally just they sit for 3 or 4 days kind of stuck. They don't know what to do, and while the organization then is just floundering, and it's not able to get back to work, right? So those being prepared, yes.
What goes into being prepared then? Is it practicing it? And if it's practicing it, how do you practice?
Yeah, so I just look at it going back to like I said, same thing as other weather, power, fire, acts of God type scenarios, and it's not like these are you don't need to practice quarterly or anything like that, but probably once a year you need to be going through. Most organizations have unless you're really small, you have some kind of risk committee that knows what's going on and have some policies in place, and can work through a practice scenario. But most of it's just hey. Here's who I contact. Here's the checklist. Run through it. It's available quickly to be able to get to, and people can know what to do and respond to. So, and just having a little bit of practice so that it's at least a little top of mind when the event occurs.
Yeah. So Given the fact that events are occurring all the time, how do you turn, or are there particular trends that you're seeing in the events that are occurring? Or, is it that by the time the trend is spotted, the attackers have already moved on to kind of that next route that they're going to pursue?
Yeah, do you mean like in terms of well, something it's actively going on, or just in general, what trends do we see as the typical breach occurs?
Yeah, kind of just generally across the industry, because it's like, maybe you hear about the facility down the street got hit with something, you see
Yeah.
something similar in the news. It's
Yes.
like, is
Yeah.
that a good way to spot trends? Or as I said,
It,
is it by the time you hear about it that way, that's already
no,
old news?
they'll leverage those trends for a long time. So that's, we'll see these go on for months, years, kind of thing. And like, for right now, like the big one right now and has been for some time is, the number is something like 90% of breaches occur because someone received an email and clicked on a link that took them to a site, a malicious site. And when they did that, their computer downloaded malicious code, and now that becomes a beachhead for that bad actor to get into the network and start poking around and trying to get access to more things. 90% of the breaches occur in that method. And so, well, if we know that, and we do, then it's like, okay, then let's start. How do we train our users on identifying those kind of things? What kind of software tools can we put in place that'll help eliminate, or we'll know, hey, that's a bad link. Don't even let them go to it. That kind of stuff. So there are things we can do to try and help. But at the end of the day, we can't catch them all. There's always some new thing that the system doesn't know about, and ultimately we got to depend on our users to help prevent that.
So you're highlighting the fact that email remains one of those primary ways
Yeah.
in, and it feels like that has been a statement for years upon years
Yeah.
now. Are there any better ways to minimize or mitigate against an attack coming in through email other than, I think as you already said, constant education, constant awareness reminders, and having to rely on individuals not just rushing through their day, which
Yeah.
inevitably happens because we're all focused on trying to finish whatever we're working on.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's really a tough one because, and this goes back to the multiple layers of security component. So, I'll throw out some examples here. So, if my user's trained and they're getting regular training on this stuff, then they'll be able to identify that, hey, this is probably a potential fraud scam kind of situation. It's probably not good. So that right there helps. But if that fails, then it becomes hey, when they click on the link, can the system resolve or get them to that website, or is there something else that's going to bounce it and check and make sure that's a valid link? Well, that's another layer. So it's like, hey, I've got that layer in place. Well, if it breaches, if we get through that, then and they actually do pull down some malicious software, do I have security on that workstation that's going to recognize that, hey, there's something that's being installed, and notify somebody and either block it or at least make sure security people know that there's something going on there and automatically quarantine that device. So again, it's just there's multiple layers that are there. If we've got them in place, then because you're going to have some that get through. And so those multiple layers then start being able to block at different levels, and ultimately protect us.
Yeah, and kind of have, as you were describing the multi-layered approach up front, that kind of ability to, if it slips past one wall, now you have, the next line of defense. And kind of, I think as you were implying earlier, it's really a matter of you're making it as hard as possible to get through to the goal that, the pot at the end of the rainbow.
Yep. Yep. That's exactly it.
Yeah. So to kind of, as security measures have evolved, are there, kind of new measures that, really help to create that, create better barriers? And, are there ones where it's easier, it's harder to implement just because of what happens? And, how does that impact, just ongoing operations?
Yeah. So obviously there's new tools coming out all the time. So that's, and we're constantly trying to, what's the latest tools, what's available that will help us to protect ourselves better. But then there's also tools that have been around for quite some time and people just haven't implemented, or are still new. I mean, I still run into organizations that haven't implemented, multi-factor authentication, for example. It's such a simple thing to get implemented and to really add a real major layer of security that will keep the bad guys out. And so a lot of this just comes down to like the tools are available. Is the organization willing to make the investments necessary to get those tools in place? But things do change over time. One of the other components of this whole thing is just hey, as an organization, we're going to decide that security is really important. And so we're just going to make those investments, have all the right tools in place. And that also then means that we're going to be regularly monitoring. We're going to be having tools that audit and that can give us feedback on how well we're doing. And it's not once a year. It's not for my annual HIPAA audit I got to do. It's part of our daily, weekly, monthly set of things we do for IT. And those things, give us a list of stuff that we need to do and help us stay on top of stuff.
Yeah, and kind of thinking about, as you just said, that, using the MFA as an example, it's, oftentimes, and I've seen this even at some places where I've worked, the complaint is, well, that makes it take longer for me to get into the system.
I know.
It impedes my workflow. So
right.
Kind of, what are some of the strategies that you might recommend to help address and overcome that type of resistance?
Yeah, and that is a tough one, and that is often the pushback that we get. So that it's like you'll have especially certain organizations, they'll have a few users that just have a lot of weight, and they don't want the hassle, and so they're able to push back. And of course, they're the ones that end up being the ones that get breached regularly because they're letting stuff in, and because they're not following the policies or that. So what we try and do is don't make this so difficult that it keeps people from being able to do their job. So, because at the end of the day, there's got to be a balance between people being able to do their job, get their work done. You don't want to have a situation where it's like I'm sitting here doing my work. I look away for 30 seconds, and then I look back. My screen's locked, and I got to re-log in. I've got to redo all my MFA. That's ridiculous. So, but is 10 minutes, 15 minutes too long to be able to have that occur? Maybe that's a good balance that's there. Maybe hey, if they're located internally on the inside the organization, we can relax that a little bit. Whereas they're coming remotely, we're a lot more strict because they're on a foreign network. They're somewhere we can't control. We don't know what's happening there. So you gotta kind of balance that out. And this just requires listening at the end of the day.
Yeah, it also sounds like it just requires being a little flexible and
yes,
being realistic about your assessment of not just what you're trying to protect against, but also the circumstances around where the operations are occurring. So, it's a pretty bright dividing line there, but just even you calling out operating within the walls of an organization or coming in remotely, that you need to set different expectations.
That's right. And for me, the big one is the remotely. So it's generally speaking, you want to believe that it's harder for someone to get into the building and sitting down at a computer and be able to access that way, right? Versus remote. I mean, we've got the whole world at the fingertips. So yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point because it's also, in a remote scenario, as you said, there's that just increased possibility of something going wrong. And I kind of want to go back a minute to, as we're talking about being prepared for an attack and, being ready to respond when something does occur, with a lot of what you're describing about, if an attack occurs, and especially in that kind of nightmare scenario where not only is there someone roaming around your system locking it down, but they've locked down your backups, what are some of the, basic steps or key steps that you recommend to folks to actually then get your systems back up and running? And is there a particular order where you might want to pursue because that helps ensure that you're not restoring and keeping the attacker inside your system in the background?
Yeah. So the first thing that happens then is that once a breach occurs, what you're trying to do is figure out, if you can, as quickly as possible, where's the breach at, how they get in. And so that it's like, how wide or narrow is the breach? And so you're trying to make that determination. So if you can, that the breach came in, it's on this computer. That's where it's starting at. We know it's spread to a few other computers in that same area. We can quarantine those off. And then now I'm only dealing with that area. But if I can't, or it is spread widely and they've got a lot of access, then my only choices are I've got to literally cut off that entire net and rebuild a new one. And rebuilding doesn't mean like I'm buying all new hardware and software and all that kind of stuff, but it just means that I'm reconfiguring, I'm kind of wiping it out and rebuilding it from scratch on the same hardware and software and so forth. And so we rebuild it, rebuild the network, rebuild the communications, reinstall the servers, reload software, and then pull the data back in, is the methodology that'll happen. But it's now happening in a net new environment that we know the hackers don't have access to because it's all brand new. Brand new in terms of configuration. I want to be clear. It's not like we had to go buy a whole bunch of stuff, but it's just we wiped it out, started over.
Yeah, and is there a way to be absolutely sure that the attacker is not still in there, or is kind of what are the types of like ongoing scans or other activity that you might want to engage in to make sure that you haven't gone through all that hard work, and then left yourself vulnerable?
Yeah, the great question, and that is one of the key things there, right? We don't want to do the whole rebuild and find out, oh, they still have access. So by doing things from a fresh perspective, rebuilding a brand new environment, they're immediately not going to be able to get in because they can't use the same tools, the same addresses and those kind of things to be able to get into it. So that immediately creates the roadblocks. That's what we're trying to do. That's number one. But then number two is most often we find is that the customer didn't have a whole bunch of tools in place that they should have had in place that create these security layers and also then notify us and let us know that there's something going on. And so we just immediately here's the whole tool set, we're putting it on, and that helps us know that as we're building it out, we're safe. So that's most often what occurs.
Yeah, so kind of as you just said, it's as you're going back and recreating the system, you're now making sure that they're up to speed in terms of the protective measures and the recommended best practices. So that way, they're not they're creating those new layers to go back to the other part of the conversation, but those new layers to make it harder to get in again in the future, because now they've appropriately taken advantage of what's available from a security perspective.
That's right. That's right.
So kind of in light of everything that we've been talking about, it's, and the ongoing presence of attacks, what do you see as, potentially some of the biggest security issues that are going to be coming up over the next year or so?
Yeah, you've probably heard this already in just the last few months, but the big talk this year is around generative AI, and so we haven't seen anything specifically linked to that yet from a malicious perspective, but everyone's just fully on guard, knowing that it's coming, and so it just boils down to this: generative AI enables anybody to be able to write software code very quickly to accomplish a particular task. And that can be used for good or for bad. And so if you can imagine then that the bad actors that are out there, they have access to those same AI tools that they're able to generate software code to do malicious things, they'll be able to more quickly develop code and or change or let that code evolve to protect or to not protect, but to go out and to breach other environments that are out there. And so we fully anticipate that that's going to skyrocket here in the months to come.
Yeah, a great point, and something people should definitely keep in mind. Because I know as I've worked on just AI use policies within companies, and especially on it could be on a development company, vendor, or anywhere, but it's one of the first things that I always see is don't use the generative AI to write your code for you, because I've seen suggestions that there are malicious things that are fed into the training data sets to make it easier to get in because they're building in the trap door.
That's right. That's right. And we don't even know then what nation states are going to be doing as they build their own AI models, and then they'll have more ability to use AI to then take code and to, hey, I'm going to go out and we're not going to breach 10 companies. We're going to go out and breach tens of thousands all at one time. And so then the industry doesn't have the opportunity to be able to try to remediate or fix broken software or otherwise. And they're able to get in and do attacks on a very, very broad basis. So that's what we're anticipating. We haven't seen it happen yet, but it's coming.
Yeah, and kind of with that inevitable, and with us also pretty much at the end of our time, would just ask if you had the pithiest answer in terms of what is the most important thing to remember from security perspective, what would that be?
Multiple layers. That's what I'm always preaching. You got to have multiple layers and think that you need a dozen of them, and have your IT people identify those dozens so you got them.
Yeah, no, a great reminder and final takeaway. And Lance, thank you so much for joining today and